Media is playing two different games. Right? I mean, the United States is behind Israel completely. It is a superpower, and it's making sure that there is a certain type of narrative that is spoken. What is media, and what's the role of media?
In fact, there's an interesting quote by Noam Chomsky, and he made this point. He's saying dictatorships use secret police to control its population, but democratic societies use multinational or corporate media, in essence, to control population. But as corporations start to own it, as governments understand the potential risks of their inability to control and monopolize information, then they start putting pressure.
So the truth is always kind of sidelined anyway. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala. And welcome to Islamic OASIS Live. Dear brothers and sisters, all of us are, watching everything that is, that's going on, different, whether it's war now with, the so-called war between, Israel and Hamas. We saw before this the whole idea of, the Iraq war that happened over WMD and how that was framed. And million people were killed on the way that was framed in institutions like by United Nations and others, and Iran-Iraq war and Bosnia war and the situation in Afghanistan and all of these things. So inshallah, the discussion today is on the role of media, its powers, the way it sets up the narratives, whether it's to go to war or pass legislation or the ideological framing that's done in order to convince people for or against, and all the different questions that are around this very important topic. And of course, to discuss this topic, we have our brother Sharif here, who is going to discuss with us the role of media and how we need to understand it in order to not only deal with it, but also as Muslims and people who are active and trying to bring back Islam, how do we deal with this? Brother Sharif, welcome to Islamic OASIS Live.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
Assalamu rahmatullah barakatuh. Sheikh, obviously you're watching same things we're watching. I know you are in England, and England probably maybe even more active as far as the media is concerned, and we are obviously sitting in the United States here, and media is playing two different games. And I mean, the United States is behind Israel completely. It is a superpower, and it's making sure that there is a certain type of narrative that is spoken when it comes to media, in on the TV channels, and what can be said, what can't be said, what can't, the symbolism, all of that stuff. Sheikh, I mean, first let's begin with this topic. What is media, and what's the role of media?
Yes, obviously we live in a relatively unique age in the last, century, and the century before, the 20th and the 21st century, which is that you've got this explosion of information and different access to information that occurs. At the same time, we live, people who live in the West, they live in so-called free democratic societies where it's meant to be the will of the people that make decisions within the society. So you've got this, on the one hand, the availability and access to information, and on the other hand, people are meant to be able to decide their own political future or decide the future of the country and the politics of that country. So information becomes crucial, and whoever controls the information can control the opinions of the people. And if they can control the opinions of the people, they can control the politics of that society and state. So the control of information and media, this is really of critical importance, particularly in the so-called democratic free West, because for them, information and public opinion is a way of morally justifying the policies of that state. So in a dictatorship, and dictatorships, by the way, also have propaganda, also want to create public opinion as well, but they don't have to have as much force in terms of getting the people on side in order to justify their policies, because they can always throw the secret police. And in fact, there's an interesting quote by Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky is a well-known academic. He wrote a book called Manufacturing Consent, where he talked about media. And he made this point. He said that dictatorships, and I'm paraphrasing now, but he's saying dictatorships use secret police to control its population. But democratic societies use multinational or corporate media, in essence, to control population. So media is very important to control. Just like in a totalitarian society, they would use the secret police. Here we have the media. So media is incredibly important. And it's a whole massive topic, and hopefully, inshallah, we can get into more details with regards to some of those points as to how they control this, because it's not just something which is free and open and anybody can say anything and anybody can investigate anything and everybody's voices are equally heard within these societies. It's not like that at all.
So you bring it to a good point here. So now in a democratic society, Sheikh, which let's say we live in, in the United States or England, Europe in general, let's say, it's very important to create a certain type of public opinion in order to get things done, because that's what they claim, that democracy here means majority rules, majority, So now, Sheikh, you and I know that, okay, it can't be majority. And you cannot really get anything done if it was about majority all the time. And so then you need a certain amount of people who understand things well, those who can, and then they understand how states run or institutions are ran, what foreign policy is, what needs to be achieved, what's important, what's not important. So then how do they balance this, Sheikh? Or is it really a balance, or is it more of it's a delusion or an illusion?
Yeah, so you're right. So effectively, Sheikh, what you're saying is that to run a society and a state requires expertise. It requires knowledge and information that's just not simply accessible to ordinary people within society. So it's not really about ordinary people making decisions. But as you mentioned, the point here is that they have to have a moral and intellectual justification for the policies and the politicians of the state and the decisions that they make. So they have to have that sort of moral justification by saying that this is representing the will of the people. So how do you have a situation where you've got this, it's like a dichotomy where you need to have experts that run the country, but at the same time, you need to have this perception that it's the people that have made the decision. Yeah. And this is what I'm saying. This is where the media comes in. The media comes in by basically framing these discussions or policy suggestions within the masses. The masses themselves are not going to understand any of the details. They're going to understand some broad perceptions, broad ideas, and that's how the media plays upon it. And the politicians will use the media in order to sort of create the perception that the people are making the decisions when it's not really. And I think, generally speaking, we're seeing, whether it's in Britain or America or other so-called Western democratic societies, a lack of trust within the political institutions, because there's an awareness that actually the people in power are not representing the opinions of the people and the masses. There's a lack of confidence and trust that's occurred. And so that's why you have people like Donald Trump, or, in UK we had a few years ago, Boris Johnson and people like that, who are populist politicians that have coming about because they seem to be rebelling against the system. But getting down to why the media is so powerful and so influential and is able to control the masses, one of the key things is the access, or the entry point, the access to entry to run a media corporation or company is not open to all people. So if I wanted to set up, for example, a news channel, Now, what would it mean to set up a news channel? Well, I'd need obviously a studio. I would need cameras. I would need lighting. I would need editors. I would need presenters. I would need correspondents. I would need to have them have cameras. I would need to, pay for them. All of these things to travel, etc. So the entry point to actually running a news site would be tens or at least millions of dollars, if not tens of millions of dollars. So that entry point is not going to be for me or for you or for ordinary people. This is going to be for multinational corporations or corporations generally, multi-million dollar corporations, etc. They're the ones that are going to be able to access this. So as an example of this, and maybe it might surprise your listeners, but in America, 90% of the media, Sheikh, do you know how many of the 90% of total media? I'm talking about books, newspapers, TV, news, film. How many corporations own 90% of the output of media in America?
I would guess. I think what I've heard from the past, maybe one or two.
5. Yeah.
Oh,
so you're right.
Hey.
But you would think 90%. You would think there'd be hundreds of media outlets. You wouldn't think that just 5 of them. Yeah. So 5. So basically, what you have is 5 corporations in America that controls 90% of the media output. For example, Time Warner, Disney, AT&T, Comcast, and News Corp International. Yeah. Those are the 5. And you think, well, what's Disney got to do with media? Well, Disney also runs, and Time Warner, they actually run news programs as well, and news outlets, magazines, newspapers, as well as certain news channels. I think CNN is by Time Warner. So as a result, if I'm a politician now and I want to create public opinion, and I want to get the access to the media, and I want the media to give some favorable positions for my policy or for my candidacy, then who do I go to? I go to these 5 corporations. So these 5 corporations can either give me access to this 90% of the media output, or it's going to close me off. It's either going to give access to certain ideas, or it's going to stop those ideas from being aired. Yeah. So that's the level of influence that corporations have. And therefore, you have politicians who have to succumb and have certain relationships with these types of media tycoons and corporations. And the same situation in Britain as well. Over 80%, I think it's about 87% of print media, which is books, magazines, newspapers, etc., they're owned by 4 corporations in Britain. Yeah, including the News Corp Corporation, which is Rupert Murdoch, which owns Fox News, also owns in UK various newspapers, including The Sun, which is a very popular tabloid newspaper, as well as also Sky News as well, which is also one in the UK. Of the 24-hour news based in the UK, there's only 2, Sky News and BBC. Yeah, and if you look at the other types of English-based news, you've got maybe Al Jazeera, you've got maybe some French news, and then you've got the American news that's also beamed over to the UK. So you have very little in terms of the mainstream media. The actual market, who's able to get the information out, is very few, and most of these people, like I said, in capitalist or ideological societies like Britain or America, then the people who are at the heads of these corporations and run these corporations are going to be infused with a particular culture, the culture of the dominant society, which is capitalist culture. If I lived in a communist society, the dominant culture will be communism. If I lived in an Islamic society, dominant culture is Islam. If I live in a secular liberal capitalist society, the dominant culture is going to be secular liberal capitalism. And so you have these people on the heads, the elites, the corporate elites, or, as some people call them, the capitalist elites. They're the ones that are able to shape the opinion, of the vast majority of people with regards to various positions, whether that's international issues or other issues as well.
But Sheikh, I mean, so with that point, I'm just to delve into that a bit more. So where does the majority go then? I mean, when we talk about the role of corporations, You're talking about 90% being owned by 80%, 87% of it owned by one or two companies in UK. But the idea that is sold that that the majority has such a huge role in these democratic societies, isn't that an ideological? You see what I'm saying?
So
the idea that majority rules, the idea, is that an ideological
tenant faith position, creed.
Not only that,
so the issue,
but is it something that a flaw within the capitalist or democratic society? You see what I'm saying? That it can't work, but they're trying to make it work.
So this is various political philosophers in the 20th century saw this as a problem, particularly those on the right, the conservatives or the Republicans in America, which was that, look, hold on, if we just let the masses decide, politics is for experts. Politics is a difficult subject. Politics requires, deliberation, research, decisions. That's not accessible to everybody. So they recognize the danger of just allowing the masses. This is why they developed this type of, media relationship of being able to influence the masses, because part of it was to say we need to be able to control the ideas that exist within society. So first level, like I mentioned at the beginning, which was about corporate media, the way corporations and capitalist interests are control the vast majority of the output of information within society. And so politicians have to have this relationship with these corporations. There's an example of this in 1997 when Tony Blair, who's the leader of the Labour Party, got into power. And Labour Party, by the way, historically have never gotten into power. It's normally the Conservatives in the UK, and Labour Party comes in when there's a big crisis. But Labour Party changed a lot of its policies during Tony Blair's time, and it became known as New Labour. And a lot of the socialist policies, it became more capitalist, more in line with the capitalist interest. And Rupert Murdoch turned around and he made a decision to turn around and actually support the candidacy of the Labour Party over the Tories. And he says himself that he was the one that was able to bring Tony Blair into power. So Rupert Murdoch, who's the head of The Sun, as well as other newspapers, he believes that he was the one that brought them in. And in fact, Rupert Murdoch and a number of these media moguls, the Labour Party senior representatives like Tony Blair, like Gordon Brown at the time in the 1990s, went and visited them on their yachts and their prawn cocktail parties. It was like a well-known thing about prawn cocktail parties, meeting these capitalist leaders and these leaders of media in order to woo them to their side, because they knew in order to win the population, we need to win these corporate elites, these capitalist elites who own the media, in order for them to give favorable information to make us popular in the eyes of the public. So just going back specifically to your question, there is a concern within capitalist society amongst their thinkers to say that actually we need to have a society where it's not any ordinary person that makes the decisions or influences people, but rather we need to have experts who are able to manage the opinion. And part of that comes through having these relationships between politicians and the corporate media in order to create and manipulate those opinions within societies.
Sheikh, is there now, so now here's the thing. Is there a difference between social media and mainstream media?
So yes, definitely there is a difference,
Okay, so is this also manufactured? Meaning that, is this, okay, so let me put that in a more...
Is it controlled and manipulating the public as we see within mainstream media? Is that your question?
That is, yes, but how do you look? There's a lot that I put out there myself regarding, let's say, the Israel situation and the war and the crimes and all of that, and it's being allowed, let's say, for now, unless it was an organization that puts out there. Now they are allowing individuals to do certain type of work. They're allowing organizations to do certain type of work depending on who they are. And then there is a whole mainstream media. So how you see what I'm saying here? I mean,
Yeah.
So, but everything is being controlled at the same time.
So what I would say, Sheikh, is this: is that there is now a whole debate about social media, its role, and that's breaking the sort of traditional media or mass media or mainstream media sort of monopoly and control. So then there's discussions of what do we do regards to these platforms. So as I mentioned about corporate media, there's also another level that mainstream media has, which is to do with legislation. How do you control opinion? Or another way of controlling opinion is to have certain legislations put in place. And this is where they put. So, for example, for me, for me to go on mainstream media, so it means to go on TV, not on the internet, but on TV, on print media, to give this out. There's various legislations that I have to adhere to, and if I don't adhere to them, then I can be sanctioned, or be prohibited from releasing that information out into society. Into society. I'll give you an example of this because it happened to me a few years ago. So I was on a channel. This is a channel which was like which was carried through. I think you guys call it cable. We call it Sky. Yeah. So cable TV is a Muslim channel that was cable TV. So to be on this to be hosted on this like Sky, so it's beamed to everybody's household, you have to pay between 50 to £100,000 just to be hosted. Yeah, per year. That's per year. So and so that doesn't include studio presenters, all that type of thing. So they have to recoup those types of costs. So I remember I went on to this this Muslim one, and there was a discussion. The discussion was about government policy related to extremism. Yeah. And there's two of us, I think, with the host, and the host was asking questions, and we were being critical of the current government policies. Now, a few weeks later, there was a letter of complaint by Ofcom, it's called, which is the government regulatory body to do with communications and mass media. And they wrote and they complained, and they said, you are in violation of certain rules. One of those rules that you're in violation of was that if you criticize government policy, you must have somebody who represents the government who articulates a case for the policy. Yeah. So you cannot, in the UK, go on TV, yeah, or host a program where you criticize current government policy unless you have somebody who represents or is in some sort of position to defend and promote government policy. Yeah. So you can't do that. Now, if the discussion was different, if the discussion was simply two people promoting government policy, they wouldn't have violated any government protocol regards to having somebody to criticize it. Do you see? So it's not neutral. If you want to support government policy, no problem. You don't need an opposition to the government
somebody
policy.
Can say that's how policies work. Can't somebody say that, okay, this is the way that governments work? I mean,
but that's fine. If people want to,
meaning, for instance, here, I mean, are you saying that look, governments have to function, and there must be certain policies in order to function, to be organized, to actually run something, to make something happen.
But we're not talking about policies. We're talking about media. We're saying the media they don't allow media outlets to criticize government policy without somebody from the government or somebody in a position to represent and be pro-government policy. They don't allow that. So how is it fair and free? Yeah, it's not free in that situation, isn't it? I'm just giving one example. There's various other types of legislation, like, for example, in America, the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act deals with communication. And there was an incident that took place a number of years ago where one individual, he was supplying on cable Al-Manar TV. Al-Manar TV was supposedly related to Hezbollah. Yeah. And he got arrested and he was put in prison for 9 years. Yeah. Because he fell foul of the Patriot Act. Yeah. So this idea
just for actually,
and free. Yeah.
So he was just, he just put it out there, meaning that he was
He
advertising
he
for it.
he he
Mm.
allowed it to be hosted.
Oh,
So
wow.
he wasn't running it. He allowed people to be able to access it on their cable, something like that. I don't know the specific, but this
Mm-hmm.
is what he did, and he got 9 years in prison for it. Yeah, because he fell foul of the Patriot Act in America. So I'm just saying these are the examples. So you have corporate media. So you have five corporations that control the vast majority of information. You have governments and politicians that have to align themselves with these corporate leaders. At the same time, you have legislation that's implemented in order to sort of, uh, you know, uh, protect and to manage the media. And remember as well, by the way, these politicians that pass these legislations, they're not just politicians independent of corporate capitalist elite. Many of them are funded by the capitalist elite. So many of the policies and many of the rules and regulations that they're bringing in to control media are actually coming from the media itself. Yeah. So again, it's a way of protecting the access to
Mm.
disseminate information. Yeah. By the media themselves, by the capitalist elite, and by the politicians. There's this relationship, this symbiotic, what people call incestuous relationship between politicians and capitalist elite. So that's another example of how they manage these things and manage information. And then what we see um, is how, because they've got an agenda, because certain groups of people now control the information, they can now frame and highlight what they want for the masses to consume. Yeah.
Mm.
So, and a good example of this is, the 7th of October attacks and how the media have framed the whole reaction and action of the Palestinians and IDF and Israel and the Zionist state, all these types of things, how it's being framed.
Mm.
Yeah. And if people want to see how good or examples of this framing is, look at Piers Morgan, you know,
Mm.
you know, and by the way, I don't know if you know, Sheikh, Piers Morgan, who funds his channel?
No, no, I don't.
News Corps International,
Ah,
Rupert Murdoch. So he gets
I-
paid by Rupert Murdoch. The
yeah.
guy who runs Fox also runs his channel. So what do they do with regards to framing? Framing, what do we mean by this? Framing is basically saying that, look, how you should look at a particular issue, how it should be highlighted. So when we look at the issue of the Palestine Zionist conflict, they don't look at it from 75 years or 100 years or since
Mm.
1917. They look at it from 7th of October,
Mm.
and they decontextualized the attack by the Palestinians to make it look like these Palestinians are just bloodthirsty, crazy animals.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, they're calling
And
them
that
animals.
is, yeah, exactly. And so that Israel, have to do the unthinkable, because if they don't, look at what would happen if these people are unleashed upon the world. Yeah. So this is how they frame it. Yeah.
I'm gonna come to that because obviously we're witnessing a genocide taking place in front of in the whole world. But Sheikh, the role of social media, they're saying almost 67%. I mean, I was listening to this thing yesterday. It was put out by some Jewish organizations. It seems like they're all coming down to the planning table. They're sitting on the table, and there's a discussion going on that 67% of teenagers actually um, are in support of the Palestinian.
Yeah.
When it comes
But
to
hey, Sheikh, the issue here is this: the mainstream media. What type of audience watches the mainstream media?
right,
It's the older audience.
right.
So
No,
it's that.
that I get that. I get
Yeah.
that. So but I guess what I'm asking is that now. So the discussion that they were having is that, look, this is very, very dangerous for Israeli state, the state of Israel in general,
Mm.
and it's very dangerous for just stability in the West.
Yeah.
And then obviously that's linked to growth of terrorism, then the growth of Islam, and all of this that they're discussing. And the plan, I mean, the way it was being discussed, that look, we have to make sure that we we get the control of what's happening in social media.
Mm.
So now, Sheikh, social media I mean, is it more truth being told over there? Is that what's happening? Or
So I think what it is that that point that you mentioned about how the Gen Z or
yes, it
younger
was. Yeah, I mean, you
generation,
might have seen that. It was.
yeah,
They were talking about
yeah,
the
yeah,
generations. Yeah.
yeah. So this is the issue, isn't it? Because they are not getting their information from the normal sources as the older generations or previous generations, from
Mm,
newspapers, from Fox News, from BBC, from CNN. They're going to look at social media and what people are uploading, and then sharing what people have uploaded. And so, if people in Gaza are uploading deaths of children, bombings of hospitals, bombings of churches, that's what they're seeing. So that may not. This is the point about highlighting and framing. The highlighting and framing is not within the control of the mainstream media as it was before in the
mm,
same way. So what they're doing now is they're looking at, okay, so similar situation. We're at the beginning of social media. Social media really has been around since what, 2004. Facebook, YouTube around about the same time, 2004, 2000. So it's about 20 years or so. This reminds me very similar to, in the 1960s when you had the Vietnam, 1970s, where they had journalists that just simply went and took pictures and weren't controlled, and then they were sending these pictures back to America, and people were seeing deaths of and killings of babies and children, Vietnamese, and also deaths of American soldiers, and they'll be reporting on this.
mm,
And suddenly, what was happening is that there was a big outcry, and there was public opinion shifted greatly. And then what you found was that the way they controlled the media after that, they started to really control the types of journalists and their movements. And just to go on this point, the example of that is in 2003, and I've seen similar examples with Israel as well, which is this idea of this embedded journalists. Have you heard this
yes.
term?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
And even
So
that's
this
being
idea,
controlled.
yeah, exactly. So the idea of embedded journalism is that the journalists are embedded with battalions of the occupying and invading forces, whether that was Iraq with the British and the Americans, or whether it is with Israel, where they have embedded journalists who are being escorted by, IDF troops to certain battleground scenes so they can film it, and then they can give narratives. And there was a situation where in Iraq war in 2003, one British journalist mentioned the point, which is that he didn't know where his role was from, being somebody who was reporting objectively and neutrally, and actually being on side of the British army, because there was times where he was helping to carry weapons, yeah, in
Mm,
certain artillery bombardments, and he was shocked that he was involved in this, but he had to. Why did he have to? Because the people that he was embedded with are also the same people going to save his life. So he's now got a bias and a prejudice, which is natural, and this is exactly what happens. So in the article recently where they took some BBC journalists and other journalists, they took them to the Al Shifa Hope Hospital recently to say, look, we've got evidence that this is a big Hamas base
yeah.
of operations, etc., etc. Yeah. So they took him, and what did they do? They took him in armored vehicles. They took him across this, battleground in essence. They're fearful. It's the IDF soldiers that are going to be protecting them. Then the IDF soldier says, you can film here, you can't film here. Yeah. This is what we're going to tell you. Yeah. So therefore they control the narrative in that way. Now, what we're seeing with social media is the inability to control that type of narrative, because we've got something called citizen journalism now.
Mm,
So ordinary people just get a phone, video something, upload it to their Facebook, social media, TikTok, YouTube, whatever it is. Yeah. So they're able to do that, bypass that filter of, corporate media, that filter of, the government legislation, and also the filter of the way they frame and reference the discussions. So they're able to get it to people. But then what we're seeing now is, so this is what I was saying, this is what happened in the 1960s and 70s with Vietnam, how they learned from that, what they did. So in the same way, they're learning from social media how to control it. So there's been examples of this now with regards to Facebook, how they've banned lots of different pages and posts in criticism
mm,
of Israel. Yeah. So many ordinary brothers have said, look, I didn't know, but my post got banned. There's many people who have found themselves falling foul with regards to Twitter, or X as it's known now, the Muslims or people, pro-Palestinians, who are very concerned about posting things on YouTube because they may get strikes against their channel, or they may get completely banned. Their channels get banned, and some people, they make a living or they get certain money in order to support their work, what they do on YouTube. So you have a self-censoring process that's taking place amongst particularly those who live in the West, because they face this even more. And so you're having this more and more difficulty in terms of getting messages out. Anybody who's used TikTok knows how easy it is to post something and get your channel taken down, or videos taken down from TikTok, because they don't even bother to check. They just have computer algorithms just to check keywords. So you're not allowed to use the word kill or rape, even if it's in a particular context, related to talking about war or whatever. If you use the word kill on TikTok, your video will be taken down and flagged, and then ultimately your account can be removed as well. So, this is what we're seeing as a move towards. At the moment, there's still opportunity and space, however, for Muslims or for people who want to use alternative means to access or to convey information out there, still there. But the problem is that, legislation can come, situations can occur, and they can clamp down upon this. And even just a few years ago, the whole I don't know if you remember, Sheikh, but there was a whole discussion about social media promoting pedophilia and child grooming. You had this in America, we had this in the UK, suicide, promoting suicide. All of these discussions that were taking place in the mainstream media amongst politicians was used as a way to put pressure on social media to control the information that's being allowed to be aired in that. Because originally the social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube were like, information for all. We don't care. We want people to spread their information. But as corporations start to own it, as governments understand the potential risks of their inability to control and monopolize information that's being spread, then they start putting pressure. And in fact, one of the key things that they did in the UK is they said social media platforms are publishers. Yeah, it's really interesting, because a publisher has editorial control or editorial responsibility. So you posting something on Facebook is not you, but it's the editorial control of Facebook. So if you're saying something incorrect, the Facebook could get into problems with it. Yeah. So therefore, they put strict criteria down, and they make it harder and harder to pass certain information out there that goes against the norm.
So, Sheikh, does that mean? Okay, let's talk about intellectual growth within this framework, right? In framing and setting up narratives, legislation, all these different things that we're talking about. What happens to that public intellectually, Sheikh? At one point, you're controlling the thinking of the people. Right? You're literally controlling what people can think and what people cannot think, whether it's in the right, whatever type of media it is. So, I mean, does the West want that? Is that something that states do, or is that something that, but is that good for us? I mean, you see how dangerous that is, right? I mean, that would mean that I would probably somebody may never ever pick up the Quran ever in their life. Just because of what they are watching, or so that's one example there. But in general, as for growth of human beings,
So this is exactly the point. What we're seeing is a dumbing down amongst the population, a dumbing down of information, a dumbing down of the discourse that's taking place, particularly in mainstream media. If you go back to the 1950s and maybe 60s as well, there was a lot of intellectual discourse, people talking and debating for hours on mainstream news or mainstream TV. Yeah. You don't find that now. It's all about sound bites. Right. It's all about, quick-witted points, and that's about it. Slogans and sound bites. That's what it is. Example of this would be like the presidential debates that you have in America. Presidential debates, I know people watch it, but actually, what information do they get from it? Very little information that they get from it. In terms of the actual candidate, deep ideas, deep discussions, none of that takes place. So there's been a dumbing down of that type of information. That's because, they don't want the masses. The reality is that people who are of the political establishment, the capitalist elite, they don't really want the masses to be involved in politics in a deep and enlightened way. They'd rather them be docile, be fed Netflix and TV and movies and watch TikTok videos all day and not be informed about deep intellectual matters so that they can have an informed understanding and hold, therefore, governments to account. Or seek a different path. So that's why they've dumbed it down to the extent where we don't see this type of discourse within mainstream media. However, what we are seeing is on the alternative media, on social media, on YouTube's podcasts that last for hours, where they do go into detail and depth. And what that demonstrates is actually there is an appetite for this type of discussion. It's just not being served within the mainstream, but rather it's now outside of the mainstream where people are trying to get this type of information from. And again, that comes down to how well will governments and political establishments try to control these types of discussions and discourses. Because there's another aspect with regards to the control, which is to limit the terms of debate. So just on this point about,
before we go to that, we're going to go to this. That would be one of the points we have to discuss. But I wanted to, just because when you were talking about dumbing down of the people, Sheikh, I was just thinking about this while you were actually talking about this. It just came to my mind. Muslim world, because of the lack of media, right? Islamic movements and socialist movements or whatever, they became very, powerful because they became the means of intellectual growth, awareness, creating awareness within the masses that to really what is going on. The average person was not going to TV to get information, but rather it was maybe to a local scholar who if he's actually aware, or to movements, Ikhwan Muslimin, Hizb ut-Tahrir. As you go anywhere in the Muslim world where there is actual discussion that is actually taking place, you find movements are there. And then in the West, it's the media. Sheikh, but when I'm looking at the situation in the Muslim world now, yes, of course, you're talking about 60%, 67% of the youth and things like this. That's mostly in the West. But in the East, I'm not seeing, massive, rallies in every capital of the Muslim world where governments could potentially be overthrown. So now in the Muslim world, Sheikh, is it that there's no movements anymore and media is already controlled? We know that. And so now what happens in a place like this?
So
what
I think
becomes the media,
point.
I guess? What becomes the media? What is the way now?
So I think you made a really good point, which is that in the Arab world and the Muslim world generally, but certainly the Arab world, because the media is so tightly controlled, people don't take it seriously. And like you mentioned, political movements became the way to have that understanding of the world and have that intellectual discourse. They wouldn't go to mainstream media that's run by governments, and that's why Al Jazeera is quite unique, because Al Jazeera came about at a time where they started to break this sort of state control of media and started to give alternative news, which was a bit critical of governments, etc. But obviously, even in certain countries, that's not even allowed to be seen. I think Saudi have banned it, and some of the UAE countries have banned it as well. So you still can't access Al Jazeera in these places. But in terms of the masses, I think there's lots of different reasons why maybe there aren't been the demonstrations in Egypt, Cairo, and maybe in Jordan. Well, Jordan has been actually. There's been big demonstrations even outside the Israeli embassy and things like that. But that's because obviously the climate of fear that's been created within these societies and these states historically, like under Hosni Mubarak's time, what happened was that they would allow demonstrations against Israel and Zionists, but they wouldn't allow those demonstrations to be ever be critical against the government of Egypt, of Hosni Mubarak. And the reason why is because it was like letting off a release valve for the people, letting off some steam. Give them demonstration, let them get shouted about Zionism, and then they'll go home. But now the concern, particularly in Egypt and in some of these countries, is that actually what they saw in 2010 and 2011 is that if they do come out on the streets, it could quickly and easily become a situation that goes against them. And they come and they start marching against them. So they've been very much harsh in their clampdowns. I think also to a certain extent, because the Arab Spring failed in countries like Egypt as well as Syria, then there is probably
within the public.
Apathy. Yeah, within the public. I think there's some apathy about change because they tried to do it in 2010, 2011. They were able to remove the dictators in Egypt and Libya, but they didn't see the outcome that they were expecting. And obviously that's a whole different discussion in terms of why they didn't see that. But I think that's had a particular memory upon this generation of Muslims in regards to this. So I think there's a few things. One is the fact that they clamped down because they're very concerned with what happened in 2010, 2011. Secondly, is that maybe the population are also feeling that we've already done these types of things and we tried to remove the ruler and it's caused more problems for us, or they returned back with Sisi and Morsi. Mohammed Morsi was removed and then executed afterwards. So there are things factors regards to this, but like I said, going back to in terms of the media, like I said, in the West, there's certainly a dumbing down, or there's been an attempt to dumb down in order to try to keep the masses under control. And I'll give you one example of this, which I think is a really good example recently. I don't know if you heard about this viral letter called the Letter to America by Osama bin Laden.
This morning, it was removed on the Sky News right away, it seems like. And then I suppose it went viral.
Yeah.
And I read that. I actually, just because they said it went viral, I actually went back and looked at it and read the thing. It's like 10 pages or something like that. But
there's a few. I think there's one which is just 2 pages long, and there's a few which is a bit more. But it was really interesting. And some people are saying, well, is it really the case that it became viral, or is it manufactured in order to discredit the pro-Palestinian movement, etc.? But irrespective of that, there are a lot of non-Muslims who read it and were shocked. Why were they shocked? Yeah. But the reason why they were shocked was not necessarily because they were agreeing everything with what Osama bin Laden was saying. It's because they were fed through mainstream media that the reason why Osama bin Laden was doing what he was doing and Al-Qaeda was doing what they're doing is because they just hated the West. They had this irrational, reaction to the West. It was just hatred. Something within themselves they hated. They couldn't understand that there was a rational, whether people agree with it or not, that's a separate issue. Obviously I'm critical, you're critical of what Osama bin Laden, his tactics were, what they did, etc. This is not about whether it was good or bad. That's not the issue. The issue was that when they read it, they suddenly realized there's a rationale behind what OBL was doing. Again, whether you agree with it or not is a separate issue, but at least it was now rationalized. Yeah. So here's a letter that was written in 2001. Yeah, and there's other letters written later on, but this was, I think, 2001, 2002. It took over 21 years for it then suddenly to become well known, because the way the media projected OBL was that this guy was irrational. Everything he stood for was irrational. These guys just hate us. They don't like what we've got. They're jealous or whatever it is. We've got these freedoms, they don't. They just want to kill us. Yeah, they read it and they thought, hold on, actually, he's got a rationalization for why he's attacking, because of the support for the Zionist entity, because of
he has the establishment of bases. There's a whole outline to it, and But Sheikh, I'm surprised to know why would Sky News even put it? I
think it was the Guardian newspaper.
Yeah,
it was a UK newspaper, the Guardian.
Yeah, it was the Guardian, actually. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Guardian is a left-wing, so it's a left-wing newspaper, so it attacks the right. Yeah.
That's another interesting twist in the media itself, right? I mean, you have right and the left. Here, for instance, you have Democracy Now!, you have in Israel, you have, I think, Haris. That's another one that you have. What? Why let them be, Sheikh? I mean, they're not being removed from online platforms. There are millions of people who watch them.
Yeah. So this is another way. Noam Chomsky talks about this point, which is about how the way to give the impression that you have a free and fair society is by creating a rigorous debate in narrow frames, so narrow limits.
That's
So
the limit of debate
is
you're talking about.
Yeah, so the remit or the limit of debate. So you have like one shade of capitalist debating another shade of capitalist, and they have this big argument between themselves, like we see with the Democrats and the Republicans, or Labour Party and the Tories in the UK. And people think, oh, look, there's this free and fair and open debate and dialogue that's taking place. But they're controlling the limits of that debate. That debate never spills out over beyond certain limits. And if it does, then they start to vilify, or they close off, or they cancel.
Meaning intellectually,
people.
meaning they have to still be within the rules set by the capitalist. Is that what you mean when you say that they won't ever allow it to?
Yeah,
I mean, for instance, I'll give you an example. Today, there's a lot of discussions going on in the West, or well, in the US, is that what to do with Israel, regarding war crimes, for instance. There's a article that. Where was it? I don't know if it was still. It was one of the newspapers in UK talking about Gaza. Where is the law? Or what is the law? I mean, it's talking about human rights violations. Should politicians like Netanyahu and others in the United States be taken to ICC? We know that's a joke, but fine. So, but that article is being read. But are you saying that because they're saying the limit is they're still talking about institutions which is set by them, so the limitation is it's only the same institutions that's set by the capitalists. They're the ones who are going to still do the end game is still in the hands of the capitalists. That's what you mean by framing or limiting the debate?
Yeah, so obviously one is in terms of the institutions like the ICC, the International Criminal Court, but which, by the way, Israel's not signed up to, or America, so they can't be taken to court anyway. But the issue is that the debate about Israel is never a debate about whether it should exist or not in the capitalist media, in the capitalist West. Now, people might turn around and say, well, isn't that quite shocking? How can you just talk about wiping off Israel from the map? Because, again, whenever anybody suggests that, they think it means wiping off Jews and annihilating Jews, which is not the case. The idea is that the discussion about Israel is that should a society or a state that's based upon the idea that only one ethno-racial group should have sovereignty over a land, should the idea exist? So, for example, when we had South Africa, white minority rule, the idea was that white people had the sole sovereign right to dictate and determine how that society should function. Yes, they may have black people in some parts of the parliament and certain positions within civil service, but the ultimate framework of that society will be controlled by a particular ethno-racial group, which was South African whites. Yeah. And they created the strata of society. So in the same way, Zionism is this idea that a certain racial ethno group has the sole sovereign right to dictate and determine the land. They may have some Muslims and some Arabs in certain positions, but it is not sufficient enough to change the ethno-racial balance of that society. And that's why there was all this ethnic cleansing that took place in 1948 and 47 and later on as well, and currently today, where they were removing Palestinians because they wanted to preserve the demographics of the ethno-racial state that they have. So the debate, this is the point that I'm trying to explain. The debate is about, is it two-state solution? What type of two-state solution? Israel has a right to exist. Nobody debates that discussion about, does this ethno-racial society state, should it exist? That's margin, that's fringe discussion. And if anybody talks about it, what happens? oh, you want to kill all the Jews, don't you? That's what it is. Yeah. And so therefore you get called anti-Semite, you get cancelled, you get prevented from engaging in these platforms, or you get ridiculed or mocked, or you'll get police in certain situations knocking on your door, as has happened in certain situations with certain brothers who have criticized the state of Israel's, this right for this political state to exist in the current frame and form that it does. So this is what you find, is that that's what I mean by set the limits. The limit is two-state solution and what the boundaries of the Palestinian state are, or should it be a one-state Zionist state with Palestinians maybe operating within a particular legal framework, or removed, or maybe migrate to Jordan and the desert of Sinai, whatever it is. Yeah, that's the debate. So they form that. And so then the discussion becomes, even if people are harsh and critical of Israel, they're never going to say Israel as a Zionist state shouldn't exist. They never say that. Yeah. So that's the boundaries that they set.
And then legislation on the top of that, and then institutional framework on the top of that. I guess that's how.
Yeah. Yeah. Go to the United Nations. Go to ICC. Speak. These international organizations, which themselves were founded by Britain and America and the capitalist elites, of the West. Yeah, those are the ways, the recourse for people to go to. The very same institution, United Nations, by the way, that helped establish the state of Israel in the first place, and legitimized and legalized the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from their own land. Let's go back to them.
So that's the discussion when it comes to Muslims regarding this area. I mean, I don't want to bring this discussion because the issue is media, but within the Muslims, the discussion is that this state exists because they remove the whole population from one area and they impose the state on them. Is that, I mean, when it comes to Islam and the Muslims, what is the issue?
Well, I think that's
a discussion we can have. But I mean,
but I want to. Reason why what I want to do is bring your question back to the core topic, which was about media, because if we understand that the way the corporate media or the way the mass media works, mainstream media works, the way they're trying to frame and develop a particular narrative, the way they frame the discussion, the way they want to highlight it, and the types of limits of debate, then what we can then do is, if we're aware of this, then we can go into a discussion, even in mainstream media. Well, firstly, we pick the battles. Don't just go on any media.
Okay,
because
so
you make.
Because I guess
so what I'm first thing,
Because I guess if we go in, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, and the second thing then is being aware of this. Don't fall into the trap. So, for example, look, the whole discussion about do you condemn Hamas, do you condemn October 7th, Hamas is the problem, is framing discussion. They're trying to frame it as Israel are just responding to Hamas. So if we're aware of this, let's reframe the narrative now. Yeah, let's challenge.
As Muslims, it's not, because at the end of the day, I mean, obviously we look at Islam and we're looking at from Islamic perspective, Islamic Sharia rulings, existence, non-existence, all of that. I mean, I that's a different discussion that we, it's for another time. But so it's also now, ideological frameworks are very important, Sheikh, in any discussion in general, right? What you believe, in this case, ideologically. In this media, I mean, other than always, again, falling, there's a lot of entrapment here, and I'm using it in this sense, in the media world, right? I mean, obviously there's entrapment in what the feds are doing with all that different thing, but I mean, they kind of always entrap you to even when we debate, that we are within the framework, whether we like it or not, because, I mean, obviously, there's certain things people are just not going to say because of jail time, because of this and that. So the truth is always kind of sidelined anyway. So I guess my question is that as Muslims, I mean, I know we're trying to set a narrative, we're trying to get the truth out there, but can we really get the truth out there other than, well, you're killing children?
So I think there's a good. I understand what you're trying to say. Basically, you're saying that, look, apart from highlighting the plight of the Gazans and the Palestinian people, can we actually talk about the Islamic solution?
Right.
And the Islamic solution would be establishing Islam over the society and the whole region, where Muslims, Jews, and Christians, and even people of no religion can live under harmony and justice of Islam. And I think, yeah, we can bring that to the fore and to have that discussion. But I think. So that's a discussion that we can have, and that's a discussion that we can have amongst non-Muslims, but it's also a vital discussion that we need to have amongst Muslims. However, there is a narrative that is being pushed by the Zionists, by the mainstream media, etc., which is to try to justify the current genocide. And so that part of it has to also be broken. The idea that the framing of the discussion is 7th of October, whereas we're saying, okay, let's break that and talk about the framing in its correct context, which is from 1948, in fact, even before that, 1917, and the idea of Zionism, and that Zionism cannot exist. Think about this. Just give you an example. Israel Arab population is 20%. There are 9 million. 2 million are Arabs. Gaza, 2 million, exist in Gaza. So that's 4 million. And in West Bank it's 3 million, 7 million. So Israel population is 9 million minus 2 million, which are Arabs, means 7 million Jews, 7 million Arabs. You create a one-state solution, and if they implement what they call quote-unquote real democracy, it's no longer a Jewish state. Especially if you allow the right to return of Palestinian refugees that are currently in refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan, children of refugees, children of the original people who were kicked out. If they're allowed in, it's not a Jewish state anymore, is it? Yeah. So the point here is that they cannot hold the idea that Zionism is a solution to the problem, because it's never going to be a solution. In fact, it's always going to perpetuate a problem. So now you've either got a couple of solutions. Either Zionism goes completely, which is like, the left, the socialists I'm talking about, like Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky, who've been critical of Israel. This is what they argue. They argue a one-state solution, but this one-state solution is a secular state. Doesn't favor one racial group.
It's no longer
like
apartheid.
Yeah, then it's no longer apartheid. And then anybody can freely choose whatever they want, and the majority, which are going to be the Arabs, are going to choose the types of laws here. And that's a big problem for the West, and it's a big problem for Zionism. And obviously, we've got problems with regards to the secular states anyway in that situation. But the other solution, obviously, is Islam. What Islam can give this society, and what it has done in the past, 1,400 years of history of Palestine, and there's only 2 periods of violence. One, when the Crusaders were there and they took the control of the Muslims, and 2, when Zionism was established and they took the control of the Muslims. Before that, Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived, side by side. So I think we have the ability to break this narrative about Zionism, is a solution or should be allowed to exist. I think that's a discussion that we can have about Zionism itself. Even without a discussion about Islam being a solution, we can still break that narrative that just is akin to supporting South Africa, an ethno-racial group, which was the whites, were in charge. Here, Zionism believes that you have an ethno-racial group, Jews, that should be in charge. And the only way they can perpetuate their position within Palestine and quote-unquote Israel today is through ethnic cleansing, even today. Yeah, because the population is shrinking compared to the Arabs. The Arab population is increasing at a faster rate. So the only way that they can keep a ethno-racial demographic of Jews is to get rid of them. At the moment, it's 50-50. So we can make that. We can make the point about how even under their international law, or under international law, there is a right for armed resistance for occupied people.
Right.
You can't call what Israel is doing defensive,
right?
When
there's
they
no
are
state
occupiers.
on the other side. Yeah.
Yeah, and they are occupying those people in a concentration camp. So how can you call it a defensive war? It's not a defense. Israel not doing a defensive war. Yeah, they're the aggressors. Yeah, even if everything they claim about Hamas is true in terms of what they did, everything they claim was criticize Hamas and would say what they did is un-Islamic and wrong, but it would still not justify that they are in a defensive position. No, they're not, because only to be in a defensive position, they would have to, even according to international law, withdraw from the quote-unquote occupation and control over what currently international law deems as occupied land.
Sheikh, two things. I mean, and we'll, I understand because we've been here for almost 40, 50 minutes. I don't want to keep going at you. But here's the thing, Sheikh. Two things. Role of experts and okay, so if you have, well, in any society, you're going to have experts.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and then those experts in any ideological state will frame the discussion. I mean, it's always intellectuals, right? I mean, so no matter what ideological state you live in, I mean, is it fair to say that you will always have limitations when it comes to the, in general public, just because there are experts?
No, I think there's no problems having experts. That's not the issue. I think the issue here is that when they talk about experts in, so you see, isn't it, on news or TV, they'll say, okay,
I'm saying experts as intellectuals, just to kind of go ahead.
Yeah, but no, I understand. But I'm just saying, in terms of you're always going to have a situation. So as a general point, you're always going to have a situation where ordinary people are going to defer to more experts. In Islam, we have scholars. You as me as a layperson, we defer to our scholars. Yeah, this is normal. This is natural. Yeah, and even people who are not politically aware, they're going to defer to those who are politically aware or know economics, etc., etc. It's not a problem in regards to this. The issue is that they will select. And this is what we're talking about mainstream media. So when you see it on mainstream media, we have an expert in the Middle East. Oh, who's the expert in Middle East? Oh, he happens to be part of Heritage Foundation, yeah, or some right-wing policy think tank, yeah, or a Rand Corporation. So he's the expert. So they're getting they're selecting the types of experts to inform you, and then you're told he's the expert. He knows what he's talking about. He's done the research. Yeah. Whereas there probably are other experts from a different political or ideological slant that they are not going to select from, not because they're not expert in it. They may even have more research and more knowledge on the issue, but because of their ideological and political position is not in line with what the capitalist or political establishment wants to push. So they will select the type of experts that they want to present and to want to highlight amongst the population, and that's why what you find is the ordinary masses are waking up to this in the West. So when they hear about the word expert now, they're like, well, what expert? The same experts that were talking about the financial crash that wasn't going to happen but did happen in 2008. The same experts that said in the UK that there shouldn't be Brexit. The same expert that said COVID was the biggest problem and big pandemic. And by the way, I'm not like a COVID denier or anything like that. But I'm just saying is that there's debates where people have felt let down by people who call themselves experts because they were selected for an opinion, and that opinion was seen to be politically biased or ideologically biased. Why they were brought on, not because they were experts, but because they were experts or people who were seen to be experts who would reinforce the political establishment's position, yeah, and not real experts on the particular topic area and subject area.
So, final question for you, Sheikh. So, can media truly be free and fair in the capitalist society?
No, definitely not. And this is exactly why we're saying. So the whole point. So the beginning of the issue was about how to have the entry point to access media, to be the people who can provide information to people, not just on a YouTube channel, but I'm talking about to have it aired in millions of people's homes, whether they want to or not. It's going to be on your TV. To have that ability requires such amount of money that it's just not feasible for ordinary people, and so therefore you have multi-million or even billion-dollar corporations that will then be the ones that will monopolize. And this is what happened in America. So you know how I mentioned there's 5 corporations. In the 1980s, there was 50 corporations that controlled majority of the media. 50. So how did it go from 50 to 5? Is because they've deregulated the market and allowed corporations to buy each other out. And so what happens? More people buy, they become bigger, bigger, and bigger, and the number of corporations becomes smaller and smaller and smaller until you just get 5. And therefore you have the more control and the ability to control information and influence within that society. So this is what we see regards to the West, which is that the capitalist society and capitalist corporate media is going to create this type of monopolization, and with this monopolization means that you create an undue, unfair influence of certain people to influence the vast majority of opinion over the ordinary people. At the same time, there's this dumbing down process of ordinary people and their knowledge of politics and international affairs. At the same time, there's framing of the debate, so they frame it in a particular way. They only highlight certain things that they want to highlight. They limit the scope of the debate between, 2 people or 2 different positions. They limit these types of things. They select the types of experts that are able to reinforce. So this is what happens in this situation. Now, I don't want people to go away and think this is all doom and gloom, because, we're just controlled like puppets by puppeteers, because it's not the case. Because we have seen not just social media, but even just ordinary interactions, the ability to create change. Like you mentioned, very good example about the Arab world, where state media control is very tightly controlled, yet people engaging in discussions, political movements, ideological, intellectual movements were still flourishing and were the medium by which people were gaining information and therefore understanding politics. They wouldn't take their politics from Syrian state news or Saudi state news or Egyptian state news, because they knew where the understanding was through these intellectual and political movements. And that's something that's very hard for any state to control. In the same way, now we've also got another element, which is social media. Now, social media and internet will become more and more tightly regulated, but at the same time, there's also it's the technology is there, which is decentralized in origin anyway. The whole idea of the internet is the decentralized information. So it's harder and harder for them to control that information in the same way they could control mass media or mainstream media. And so there's still opportunity out there to engage on YouTube, your channel, Twitter, things like this, in order to get that information out there. And we're seeing that influence. The Zionist propaganda is being exposed day by day. Whether it's I think, Sheikh, you had a phone call from a brother who's a doctor, I think it was, from Ashifa, or who works.
Yeah. Did you hear it?
I heard it. Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Oh, mashallah.
Yeah.
Actually, while you're on the show, we're gonna have him on, inshallah, on Saturday. The problem, Sheikh, make dua. We haven't been able to get in contact with him since this morning. Everybody on the team is trying to get in contact with him, and we just can't get in contact with him. I've been looking. I mean, he's usually good at, just responding. I'm okay. I'm good. Just something. So far, there's been nothing. Allah protecting, and I'm just, it's scary, Sheikh. And I spoke to him last night, and he sent me a dua and saying, keep me in your dua and stuff, and so, it's just.
It's. I think what it is that, Sheikh, I want people to have this idea of hope, which is that there is still opportunity to get information out there, whether that's using social media and the avenues that social media still allows us to do, whether it is through one-to-one engagements, whether it's through intellectual and political movements. There's demonstrations, that protests that we've seen in UK and America.
I know I said that was going to be the last question, but when you asked me regarding the brother who's in Shifa, Sheikh, now the internet has been shut down. I think that's what's happening. They were telling us that so we actually recorded him yesterday also in case he can't come on live, because we were all worried that But Sheikh, so now internet can be shut off. Is the West at its ideologically at its end?
Yeah.
Where
so it's weak. Yeah, Sheikh, it's a weakness. This is the point. You're 100% right. It demonstrates weakness. Remember how totalitarian states, they have to use police and legislation to control information. Yeah. Whereas the West tries to use the media to control the information and give the perception it's free. But when the media fails to control the information, what do? They revert back to the old fascist totalitarian ways of the West, and they cut the information off, or they cut the internet off, or they force legislation. Like there's a brother from Five Pillars, Five Pillars,
Dilly, of course, brother Dilly, yeah, of course.
And he recorded himself having police come to his house because of one of his Twitter posts that he had.
Huh.
So he recorded. So I think if you go on his Twitter or on YouTube as well, on the Five Pillars, you can see the recording of himself and the police. The police came. They said, "We have concerns. We're just here to talk to you and advise you and this, that, and the other." But it's an intimidation tactic. They may be the nicest people, these police officers in the world, whatever. But the idea is that you send police around your house, even if they're very, very nice and polite. It's about intimidating. Yeah, right. And that's the first stage, intimidate. And if that doesn't work, then, like you said, cut off internet. They stop you from talking. They establish legislation. There's a whole debate about the chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, right. Whether this is anti-Semitic, whether it should be banned, whether it should be brought in legislation, all these types of things.
But I heard in UK it is banned now. Is it or no?
No, it's not banned. It's not banned. Still not banned.
Okay.
It's very hard because, Sheikh, for a capitalist ideological society like Britain, which claims to be liberal secular, for them to ban that speech, it's a really hard thing for them to do because they have a deep root-rooted culture, in terms of these types of beliefs. And they know that if they ban this, it's going to affect everything else.
Right. I saw people screaming 1948 because I think some of them thought that this is going to be banned. So they just kept saying that we're not going to say that chant now. We'll just say 1948, which means the same thing. It's just, but
But Sheikh, this is the issue. This is the whole discussion. Before this 7th of October, you had the right, trying to court the Muslims. I don't know if you saw this on the internet, online, and in mainstream media. They were trying to bring the Muslims. Say, why don't you support the Republicans? Yeah, why do you always go to the left and the Democrat? We're your natural allies. We don't believe in this LGBT. You don't believe in this LGBT. All that type of stuff. Yeah. So they were trying to court the Muslims. And then what happened? 7th of October happened. What did they do? They start. Oh, by the way, just as another point in regards to courting the Muslims, they were also complaining. They were saying, look, we're like you. We get banned. We get cancelled. Yeah.
Right.
If you're a teacher and you're critical of LGBT, you could be fired. And if you're in the media, you could be dropped, and all these types of issues. They were complaining about this. And this is the point. The point here is that the right recognizes that if you bring in too many legislations, yes, it will target the Muslims and stop them from saying things like this. But they also know it will also affect them. The left will use it against them. So that's the balancing act that they're trying to do. And in that process, we can still, inshallah, be effective.
So the whole media in the West is nothing but a balancing act.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the whole time you're trying to figure out how to balance the truth from haqq and truth from falsehood and all this stuff that's going on, Sheikh. Brother Sharif, Jazakallah khair for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure to have you, Akhi. And it's amazing. And alhamdulillah, we have intellectuals like you and many more. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to give us the people like you, Sheikh. And these discussions are very hard to have with others, because it's very people don't understand the ideological foundations of capitalism. And then, it's hard to get into these discussions in many ways, which is, media is an institution, whether we like it or not. And then that's an institution that has to be controlled ideologically, or at least, if not, through government. And so, again, Jazakallah khair for coming and talking and discussing this stuff. As this will not be the last time. And for the rest of you brothers, and sisters, we Muslims have to be politically aware. And that awareness is what is at this point, with everything that's happening online or whatever it is that we're discussing. If Muslims are not aware, then it's very easy to be fooled. It's very easy to have opinions that are actually not even our opinions, meaning that we're not even thinking anymore. So, dear brothers and sisters, please, make sure that you are aware, make sure that your children are aware, make sure that we create an awareness of what Islam is and how Islam deals with all of the things that are going around us, and keep standing up for the truth and keep speaking the truth, because at the end of the day, it's not even about media or anything else. It's about what we have to face on the day of judgment in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.